John's chest tightened as he drove through the familiar streets of his childhood. The city's most powerful real estate mogul, he never imagined he'd return to this humble neighborhood, much less in a private ambulance, gasping for air. Mercy General Hospital. Fast, he rasped to the driver, his hands trembling as he clutched the leather seat. There were other hospitals closer, private clinics where they knew him by name, but something inside him pulled him toward this specific place, the same public hospital where he'd lost his mother so many years ago. John Miller had built a financial empire from nothing, but at this moment, with sirens wailing and his breathing growing labored, all his wealth seemed meaningless. His elegant Italian suit was soaked with sweat, and his normally imposing face showed a vulnerability no one had ever seen. Mercy General Hospital appeared before his eyes like a ghost of the past, with the same weathered brick walls and the same windows fogged by time. But now, from the perspective of a man who had known luxury and power, the poverty of the place struck him with devastating force. "We need a gurney now," the paramedic yelled as they got John out of the vehicle. John tried to walk on his own, his pride battling his physical weakness, but his legs gave way and he had to accept the help. The emergency room was buzzing with activity. Nurses ran from one side to the other, attending to urgent cases. The air was thick with the scent of disinfectant and anxiety. John watched his surroundings, his eyes half closed, vividly remembering the last time he'd been here. He was just 12 years old when his mother Amelia was brought in under similar conditions. But that time there was no money for special treatments, no health insurance, only the hope that the doctors at the public hospital could perform a miracle. "Sir, I need you to relax and breathe deeply." A soft female voice interrupted his thoughts. John looked up and met the most beautiful eyes he had ever seen. They were an intense emerald green, identical to his own, framed by long dark lashes that enhanced a face of natural, serene beauty. Dr. Elena Vargas approached with graceful yet decisive movements. Her brown hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, with a few rebellious strands framing her oval face. Despite the visible exhaustion in her features, her eyes conveyed a warmth and compassion that John hadn't seen in a long time. "I'm Dr. Vargas. We're going to take care of you," Elena said, quickly checking John's vital signs. Her hands, delicate but confident, worked with a precision that spoke of years of experience saving lives. John watched her work, mesmerized not only by her beauty, but by something deeper, an inexplicable connection that calmed him. It was as if those green eyes were a mirror to his soul, as if she could see through all the barriers he had built over the years. "Can you tell me your full name and what symptoms you've experienced?" Elena asked, her fingers searching for a pulse on John's wrist. The contact was like a gentle electric shock that surprised him. John Miller," he replied in a hoarse voice. "Chest pain, difficulty breathing, dizziness." He omitted mentioning who he really was, his status in the city, his companies. For the first time in decades, he just wanted to be treated like any other patient. Elena frowned slightly at the name, as if something about it were familiar, but she continued her professional examination. "We're going to take you to a private room for some tests. We need to rule out a heart attack," she explained, gesturing to the nurses. As they moved him on the gurney, John couldn't take his eyes off Elena. There was something about her that deeply disturbed him, an inexplicable connection that went beyond physical attraction. Her green eyes seemed to hold secrets, untold stories that resonated with his own past. The exam room was small and modest, a stark contrast to the luxurious private clinics John frequented. The walls were painted a pale green that was peeling in some places, and the medical equipment, though functional, showed signs of intensive use. But none of that mattered when Elena was nearby. "I need you to take off your shirt for the EKO," Elena instructed professionally. Though John noticed a slight blush on her cheeks, it was clear she had recognized the quality of his clothes, the elegance of his Swiss watch, the small details that gave him away as a man of means. As Elena prepared the electrodes, John watched her movements. There was a natural grace in everything she did, an absolute focus that spoke of her dedication to medicine. Her hands, without rings or ostentatious jewelry, were those of someone who had chosen to serve rather than get rich. "How long have you worked at this hospital?" John asked, needing to hear her melodic voice again. Elena smiled faintly as she placed the electrodes on his chest. Practically my whole medical career. I graduated from the state university with a scholarship and decided to stay here to give something back to the community that helped me get my education. Her words touched something deep in John. He remembered once dreaming of doing something similar before ambition and resentment consumed him. That's admirable, he murmured with genuine sincerity. What do you do, Mr. Miller? Elena asked while interpreting the EKG results, her expression concentrated and professional. John hesitated for a moment. Business, he replied vaguely. Investments and things like that. He wasn't technically lying, but he wasn't being completely honest either. He didn't want the knowledge of his wealth to change the way she treated him. The EKG results came back, and Elena studied them carefully. Good news, she said with a smile that lit up the whole room. You haven't had a heart attack. It seems to be a severe episode of anxiety combined with physical stress, but we're going to run some additional tests to be completely sure. While they waited for the blood test results, Elena sat in a chair next to John's gurney. For the first time since he had arrived, the atmosphere relaxed slightly. This hospital must hold a lot of stories, John commented, looking for a way to keep the conversation going. Elena's eyes darkened for a moment. Yes, a lot of them. Some beautiful, others tragic. I've seen babies born, and I've said goodbye to loved ones. Every day is different. Every patient has their own story. Have you ever lost someone important here? John asked, not knowing exactly why he was asking such a personal question. Elena looked at him with curiosity. Why do you ask that? I lost my mother in this hospital, John admitted, surprised by his own honesty. It was a long time ago, but I never forgot it. Elena's expression changed instantly. Her green eyes filled with compassion and understanding. I'm so sorry. Losing a mother there are no words to describe that pain. Are you speaking from personal experience? John asked softly. Elena nodded slowly. I also lost my mother when I was very young. In fact, it was right here in this hospital. It's what inspired me to study medicine. John felt as if the world stopped for a moment. A deep, inexplicable connection was established between them. Two souls who had known loss in the same place, who had been marked by pain, but had chosen different paths to deal with it. Can I ask you what happened? John ventured, feeling he needed to know more. Elena looked out the window, her eyes lost in distant memories. She was very sick. The doctors did everything they could, but her voice broke slightly. We didn't have the resources for specialized treatments. She was a hardworking, single woman who had sacrificed everything to give me a better life. John's heart raced. The story was too similar to his own. What was your mother's name? He asked, even though he feared the answer. Amelia Vargas, Elena replied, and the words fell like a bomb in the silent room. John sat up abruptly on the gurney, his face pale as a sheet. What? What did you say? Elena looked at him with concern. Are you okay? Your blood pressure just spiked. Your mother, John repeated, his voice barely a whisper. You said Amelia Vargas. Yes. Why? Did you know her? John closed his eyes, feeling as if he were falling into an abyss. The odds were impossible, but the evidence was there. The same green eyes, the same last name, the same story of loss in the same hospital. Dr. Vargas, he said slowly, I think we need to talk. The silence in the hospital room was deafening. Elena watched John with a mixture of confusion and growing alarm as he struggled to find the right words to explain the impossible. Mr. Miller, you're very pale. I need you to lie back and breathe deeply, Elena said, her medical instincts taking over despite the strange tension that had arisen between them. John obeyed mechanically, but his green eyes remained fixed on her. Doctor, I need to ask you a very important question. Your mother, Amelia Vargas, do you remember if she had any other children? Elena frowned, clearly confused by the question. No, not that I know of. She always told me I was the only good thing she had in her life. Why do you ask? John's heart was beating so hard, he was sure she could hear it. Because my mother was also named Amelia Vargas, and she abandoned me when I was a little boy. The words fell between them like stones in a quiet pond, creating ripples of shock that expanded in ever wider circles. Elena took a step back, her face showing an expression of complete disbelief. That's, that's impossible, Elena whispered, her voice trembling. It must be a coincidence. Vargas is a common last name, and so is Amelia. When did your mother die? John interrupted, sitting on the edge of the gurney despite Elena's medical protests. Elena calculated mentally. About 30 years ago, I was 8 years old. John felt as if he had been physically struck. Mine died at the exact same time. I was 12 years old, and I had come here after years of not seeing her. They looked at each other in silence, the weight of the possibility hanging between them like a sword of Damocles. Elena slowly approached, studying John's face with an intensity that made him feel completely exposed. Your eyes, she murmured, they're exactly like mine, like my mother's. And you have the same smile she had, John admitted, his voice rough with emotion. The same way of tilting your head when you're thinking. Elena sank into the chair, her hands visibly shaking. If what you're suggesting is true, that would mean we're siblings. Brothers and sisters, John completed the sentence that neither of them dared to pronounce. The world seemed to have stopped around them. The sounds of the hospital faded, the voices in the hallway became distant, and only the two of them remained, facing a reality that defied all logic and probability. But that can't be, Elena said, getting up abruptly and starting to pace. My mother never talked about other children. She never mentioned a brother. John watched her, recognizing in her nervous movements echoes of his own personality. My mother didn't either. When she left me, I always thought it was because she didn't love me enough. Left you? Elena stopped abruptly, turning to face him. What do you mean she left you? My mother would never have abandoned a child. The look of pain that crossed John's face was so intense that Elena felt an instinctive pang of compassion. I was 12, he began slowly. We lived in a little house near the river. It was a very difficult time. There was little work, less money. One day I came home from school and found a note on the table. John closed his eyes, reliving the most painful moment of his childhood. The note said I had to go live with my aunt because she couldn't take care of me anymore. That it was better for me, that I would have more opportunities away from her. My God, Elena whispered, bringing a hand to her mouth. I waited for days for her to come get me, John continued, his voice breaking. I thought maybe she had changed her mind, that she would come back, but she never did. My aunt told me later that Amelia had secretly come to watch me sleep some nights, but that she didn't dare get close. Tears were running down Elena's cheeks. She never told us anything. She raised me alone for as long as I can remember. I always thought my father had abandoned both of them. Maybe that's why she did it, John reflected. Maybe she thought that if she separated us, at least one of us would have a chance to get ahead. They remained in silence, processing the implications of what they had just discovered. Elena approached John again, studying every detail of his face as if it were the first time she was seeing it. We need to be sure, she said finally. This is too important to be based only on coincidences. John nodded. What do you suggest? A DNA test, Elena replied, without hesitation. It's the only way to know for sure. How long would it take? John asked, surprised at how anxious he was to know the answer. At this hospital, probably a week, but I know a private lab that can do it in 24 hours. Elena explained. It's just expensive. John almost smiled at Elena's financial concern. Don't worry about the plan, I'll take care of it. Elena looked at him with renewed curiosity. You never told me exactly what you do, Mr. Miller. It was the moment of truth. John knew it. If they were really siblings, he couldn't keep hiding who he was. I'm in real estate and investments. I have several companies in the city. You're John Miller of Miller Enterprises? Elena asked, her eyes widening in astonishment. John nodded slowly. The same? Elena took a step back, her expression changing completely. You are one of the richest men in the region. Your name is in all the business papers. Yes, John admitted, feeling strangely vulnerable under Elena's judgmental gaze. And you came here to a public hospital, when you could afford any private clinic in the country? Elena asked, her voice filled with a mixture of confusion and something that sounded dangerously like disappointment. John got up from the gurney, approaching her slowly. I came here because it's where I needed to be, where my heart brought me, even if my mind didn't understand it at the time. Your heart, Elena repeated ironically. The heart of a man who has become famous for evicting poor families to build luxury towers. Elena's words hit John like physical slaps. It was true. He had built his empire with ruthless methods, justifying his actions by telling himself it was just business. But hearing those words from the woman who might be his sister caused him a pain he hadn't expected. You don't know me, John said, his voice defensive. No, Elena replied, crossing her arms. I know your reputation. I know the families who have had to move out because you bought their buildings and tripled the rent. Some of those families have ended up here at this hospital because they can no longer afford private medical care. John felt like the air had been knocked out of his lungs. That's just business. It's not personal. It's not personal? Elena's voice rose. Do you think for those families it's not personal? Do you think losing your home is just a business transaction? For the first time in decades, John felt genuinely ashamed of his actions. Seeing the disappointment in Elena's eyes, so similar to his own, hurt more than any criticism he had ever received before. I never thought of it that way, John admitted, his voice barely audible. Of course you didn't, Elena said, her tone softening slightly as she saw the genuine anguish on John's face. When you have so much money, it's easy to forget that behind every transaction, there are real people with real lives. John sat down heavily on the gurney, feeling the weight of years of questionable decisions. How can I fix this? If we really are siblings, I can't stand for you to look at me that way. Elena sighed deeply. It's not about fixing something for me. It's about recognizing that your actions have real consequences in people's lives. Teach me, John said suddenly, surprising them both with his request. If we are siblings, show me what you see every day. Help me understand. Elena studied him carefully, looking for signs of sincerity in his expression. Do you really mean that? I've never been more serious in my life, John replied. If Amelia was really our mother, then she'd have raised us to be very different. You chose to help people. I chose, well, other priorities. But maybe it's not too late to change. A knock on the door interrupted their conversation. A nurse entered with John's blood test results. Dr. Vargas, the results are ready, the nurse said, handing her an envelope. Elena opened the envelope and studied the papers. Everything is normal, Mr. Miller. Your levels are perfect. The episode was definitely caused by stress and anxiety. So I can leave? John asked medically. Yes, Elena replied, but I recommend you reduce your stress level, get regular exercise, and maybe reconsider some of the decisions that are causing you that anxiety. John looked at her intensely. Will you take that DNA test with me? Elena hesitated for a moment, then nodded slowly. Yes, but regardless of the results, you need to understand that if we're going to have any kind of relationship, there will have to be real changes in your life. I understand, John said, getting up from the gurney. When can we do it? Right now, if you want, Elena replied. I'll take the samples and send them to the lab. The results will be ready tomorrow afternoon. As Elena prepared the equipment to take the saliva samples, John watched her work. Her movements were precise and careful, each gesture revealing years of practice and dedication. She was beautiful, not just physically, but in the way she gave herself completely to her work, in the way she genuinely cared about every patient. Can I ask you something personal? John said as Elena labeled the vials. I think after what we've discussed today, personal questions are inevitable, Elena replied with a sad smile. Did you ever wonder why you chose to stay at this hospital? With your intelligence and skills, you could work anywhere, make a lot more money. Elena paused for a moment, considering the question. You know what I remember most vividly about our mother's death? The use of the word our made John's heart skip a beat. What? He asked softly. I remember the doctors and nurses here fighting to save her, even knowing that we couldn't pay for specialized treatments. I remember they never treated us like second-class citizens. They gave us dignity at the most difficult moment of our lives. John felt a lump in his throat. I decided to stay here because I wanted to be part of that tradition. I wanted to make sure that other families like ours received the same compassion and care regardless of their ability to pay. And you've never regretted it? John asked. You've never wished you had more money, more comforts? Elena smiled, and for the first time since they had met, her smile was completely genuine and unreserved. Do you know how many babies I've helped bring into the world? How many lives I've helped save? How many families have thanked me for being there in their most difficult moments? John shook his head. I don't know the exact number, but I know that each of those experiences has made me richer than any amount of money ever could. John was silent, contemplating Elena's words. For the first time in his adult life, he wondered if he had chosen the right path, if the relentless pursuit of material wealth had been worth it. The samples are ready, Elena announced, interrupting his thoughts. I'll send them to the lab this afternoon. And now what? John asked. Now we wait, Elena replied. 24 hours to find out if we're really brother and sister. John headed for the door but stopped before leaving. Dr. Vargas, Elena, he said, regardless of what the tests show, I want you to know that this day has changed something in me. Elena looked at him with curiosity. What do you mean? I mean that it's been a long time since I felt so human, so connected to something real. John paused. If we are siblings, I would like to get to know you better. And if we're not, I'd like to get to know you anyway. A slight blush colored Elena's cheeks. Mr. Miller, John corrected her gently. Please call me John. John, Elena repeated, testing his name on her lips. I think regardless of the results, we both have a lot to learn from each other. John nodded and left the room, leaving Elena alone with her conflicting thoughts and emotions. As he walked through the hospital corridors, John stopped at several points, truly observing for the first time the place where he had lost his mother. He saw families anxiously waiting for news of their loved ones, doctors and nurses working tirelessly despite the lack of resources, people from all walks of life united by the common vulnerability of the human condition. For the first time in decades, John Miller felt part of something bigger than himself, something more important than his bank accounts and properties. And it had all begun with a pair of green eyes that reflected not only his own image, but perhaps his soul. Upon leaving the hospital, John didn't head to his office as planned. Instead, he drove slowly through the streets of his childhood, revisiting places he had avoided for years, mentally preparing himself for the revelations that would come the next day. Because regardless of what the DNA test showed, John knew that his life would never be the same again. The longest 24 hours of John's life passed like an eternity. He couldn't focus on work, he couldn't eat normally, and he definitely couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Elena's face, her green eyes so identical to his own, her smile that vaguely reminded him of his mother. He had spent the night going through every memory he had of Amelia, looking for clues he might have missed. He remembered her musical laugh, the way she sang while cooking, how her eyes filled with tears every time she hugged him during those last days before sending him to his aunt. Now, with an adult perspective, he realized that those tears were not of frustration or exhaustion, but of a deep pain that he had been too young to understand. At 3 p.m. the next day, John arrived at the hospital, his heart beating like a drum. He had worn casual clothes, jeans, and a simple shirt, trying to shed the image of the business mogul he had cultivated for so many years. He wanted Elena to see him as John, just John, not as the CEO of Miller Enterprises. Elena was waiting for him in the same room where they had met. She was wearing her medical uniform, but John noticed she had done something different with her hair. The strands that had previously escaped carelessly from her ponytail now gently framed her face, and she was wearing a subtle touch of makeup that highlighted the natural beauty of her green eyes. The results came in this morning, Elena said without preamble, holding a sealed envelope in her trembling hands. John walked slowly toward her, feeling as if he were walking toward his destiny. Have you read them? Elena shook her head. I wanted to wait for you. I thought we should find out together. They sat across from each other, the envelope between them like a bridge to the truth. John held out his hand, and Elena placed hers on top. For a moment, they just stayed like that, connected by touch and anticipation. Are you ready? Elena asked, her voice barely a whisper. John nodded. Together. Elena opened the envelope with visibly shaking hands. She unfolded the results sheet, her eyes quickly scanning the technical lines until she reached the final conclusion. Her expression changed immediately, and John knew the answer before she spoke a word. 99.9% probability of fraternal relationship. Elena read, her voice breaking with emotion. John, we're siblings. The world stopped for a moment. 30 years of separation, unanswered questions, pain and loneliness crystallized into those simple words. John felt as if a part of him that had been lost for decades had finally come home. Siblings, John repeated, trying the word on his lips. I have a sister. Tears ran freely down Elena's face. I have a brother. I always knew something was missing, but I never imagined. Without thinking, they both stood up at the same time and found themselves in an embrace that seemed to contain all the lost years, all the conversations they never had, all the family moments that had been stolen from them by circumstances. Our mother, John whispered against Elena's hair. She had to make the most difficult decision of her life. She loved us, Elena replied between sobs. She loved us so much that she was willing to break her own heart to give us better opportunities. They slowly pulled apart, studying each other's faces with new eyes. Now that they knew the truth, the similarities seemed even more evident. The same green eyes, the same jawline, the same way of frowning when they were concentrating. What do we do now? Elena asked, wiping away her tears. John took her hands in his. Now we really know each other. We make up for lost time, and I need to make some important changes in my life. What kind of changes? John took a deep breath. Yesterday, after leaving here, I drove through our old neighborhood. I saw buildings I had bought and converted into luxury condos, families who had had to move away from their communities because of my business decisions. For the first time, I truly saw the human impact of what I've been doing. Elena listened attentively, not judging, allowing him to process his thoughts. I want to get to know your world, Elena. I want to understand what our mother saw in you that made her feel proud, even in her last days. How do you know she was proud of me? John smiled sadly. Because yesterday I went to see my Aunt Carol. She told me that Amelia had been following your progress from afar. She knew you had gotten a scholarship to study medicine. She knew you worked here. She was very proud, but also very guilty for not being able to be there to celebrate your achievements with you. New tears welled up in Elena's eyes. I never knew that. She also told me something else, John continued. Amelia had been saving every penny for years with the hope of one day being able to reunite the three of us, but she died before she could do it. Elena put a hand to her heart. All this time I thought maybe I hadn't been enough for her, that maybe I had disappointed her in some way. Never, John said firmly. She was proud of both of us, but she also carried the guilt of having separated us. My aunt told me that Amelia died uttering our names. The siblings remained silent for several minutes, honoring the memory of the mother who had sacrificed her own happiness for their sake. John, Elena said finally, if you really want to know my world, there's something I'd like to show you. What is it? Come with me on my rounds. Meet the patients. See with your own eyes the stories behind the medical statistics. But I warn you, some of these stories might be difficult to hear. John nodded without hesitation. I'm ready. Over the next few hours, Elena guided John through different sections of the hospital. They visited the pediatric ward, where children with serious illnesses played bravely despite their circumstances. John met Maria, a 6-year-old with leukemia whose family had sold everything they had to pay for her treatment. How can they keep smiling? John asked Elena as they watched Maria draw with colored crayons. Children have an incredible capacity to find joy, even in the most difficult circumstances, Elena replied. They teach us that happiness doesn't depend on what we have, but on how we choose to see the world. In the maternity ward, John witnessed the birth of twins whose mother, Sophia, was a single domestic worker. Despite her precarious economic situation, the joy on her face as she held her babies for the first time was absolutely radiant. This is the real miracle, Elena whispered as they watched Sophia with her children. No matter how much money you have or don't have, love is free and abundant. But it was in the palliative care unit where John experienced the most profound transformation. He met Roberto, an elderly man who had worked his whole life as a mechanic and was now facing his last days, surrounded only by hospital staff since his family couldn't afford to travel to visit him. Aren't you afraid? John asked, sitting next to Roberto's bed. The old man smiled weakly. When you're my age, young man, You'll learn that the only things that really matter are the people you have loved and those who have loved you. Everything else is just noise. After leaving Roberto's room, John leaned against the hallway wall, overwhelmed with emotions. Are you okay? Elena asked, placing a comforting hand on his shoulder. My whole life I've been chasing things I thought would make me happy, John said. Money, power, recognition. But these people who have so little materially seem to understand something fundamental about life that I've been completely missing. Elena smiled with understanding. Do you know what the difference is? What? They know that we're temporary, that we're only here for a limited time. That makes them value every moment, every human connection. Money can buy a lot of things, but it can't buy time, and it definitely can't buy genuine love. John looked at his sister, seeing not only her physical beauty, but the beauty of her spirit, forged by years of selfless service to others. I want to change, John said suddenly. I don't just want to say I'm going to change, I really want to do it. But I don't know where to start. Elena studied him carefully. Are you willing to make real sacrifices? To make decisions that might cost you money but will benefit other people? Yes, John replied without hesitation. Then let's start with something concrete, Elena said. That apartment building on Hope Street, the one you bought 6 months ago and tripled the rents on? John nodded, remembering the property. 3 families had to move because of that decision. One of them, the Garcias, ended up living in a temporary shelter. Their youngest son, Luis, is in my pediatric ward because he developed severe asthma due to the unsanitary conditions of the shelter. The impact of Elena's words hit John like a hammer. I didn't know. It wasn't your job to know, Elena said gently but firmly. But now that you do, what are you going to do about it? John reflected for several minutes. I'm going to call my property manager right now. The families can move back, and I'm going to reduce the rents to what they were before. That's a good start, Elena said with a genuine smile. John took out his phone and made the call immediately. While Elena listened, she could hear the surprise and confusion in the property manager's voice, but John stood firm in his instructions. After he hung up, Elena hugged him spontaneously. I'm proud of you. It's only the beginning, John promised. I want to review all my properties, all my businesses. If I'm going to honor our mother's memory, I need to make sure my actions reflect the values she tried to instill in us. Over the next few weeks, John and Elena spent time together almost every day. John drastically reduced his work hours so he could accompany Elena at the hospital, learning not only about medicine, but about compassion, empathy, and selfless service. He implemented radical changes in his company. He established a fund to help families facing financial difficulties due to rent increases. He created a scholarship program for low-income medical students and, most significantly, began reinvesting a substantial portion of his profits into improvements for the neighborhoods where he owned properties. The transformation did not go unnoticed in the business community. Some colleagues criticized his new policies as financial suicide, but John discovered that ethical businesses could also be profitable, just in a more sustainable and humane way. One day, 6 months after their first meeting, John surprised Elena with a special proposal. I've been thinking about something, John said as they walked through the hospital garden during Elena's break. What is it? I want to establish a free medical clinic in our old neighborhood in memory of Amelia. But I don't want it to be just another philanthropic project run from the top. I want you to run it. Elena stopped abruptly, looking at him in astonishment. John, that would be, but I don't have experience managing. You have something much more valuable than administrative experience, John interrupted. You have heart, you have integrity, and you really know the needs of the community. I can take care of the financial and administrative aspects. Together, we can create something that truly makes a difference. Elena looked at him for a long time, then smiled the brightest smile John had ever seen. Do you know what our mother would have said about this? What? That we are finally doing what she always hoped for us, taking care of each other and taking care of our community. A year later, the Amelia Vargas Medical Clinic opened its doors in the heart of the neighborhood where they had grown up. The inauguration was a community celebration, with entire families coming to thank the Miller siblings for bringing hope and quality medical care back to their neighborhood. John, who had sold several luxury properties to finance the clinic, discovered he was happier than he had been in decades. His relationship with Elena had grown not only as siblings, but as partners in a shared mission of service. "Do you ever regret it?" Elena asked him one afternoon as they reviewed patient files at the clinic. "Regret what?" "Having changed your life so much, having left behind the pursuit of money for its own sake." John smiled, looking out the window at the park where children from the neighborhood were playing happily. "You know what Roberto told me before he died?" Elena shook her head. The old man had passed away peacefully 3 months earlier, with John and Elena by his side. "He told me he had discovered the secret of true wealth just in time. That real wealth is measured in lives touched, in smiles created, in tears of gratitude, not in bank figures." Elena took her brother's hand. "I think our mother would be proud of what we've built together." "I'm sure of it," John replied. "And I think I finally understand why she separated us. It wasn't because she didn't love us enough, but because she loved us so much that she was willing to sacrifice her own happiness so that we could find our individual paths to becoming the people we needed to be." "And do you think we succeeded?" John looked at his sister, seeing in her green eyes not only the reflection of his own, but the reflection of a life lived with purpose, compassion, and love. "I think the journey has just begun." That night, as they closed the clinic, John and Elena stopped in front of the plaque at the entrance that bore their mother's name. They had placed a photo of Amelia next to the plaque, an image they had found among their Aunt Carol's possessions. "Thank you, Mom," Elena whispered, touching the photo. "For separating us when it was necessary," John added, "and for reuniting us when we were ready." They completed together. As they walked together toward their respective cars, John reflected on the incredible turn his life had taken. A panic attack had led him to the hospital where the sister he never knew he had worked, and that meeting had resulted in a complete transformation of his worldview. He had learned that true wealth isn't accumulated, it's shared. That real success isn't measured in what you get, but in what you give. And that love, whether fraternal, romantic, or love for humanity in general, was the only investment that guaranteed infinite returns. The following year, John married Patricia, a nurse at the clinic who had won his heart with her dedication to patients. Elena was his best man, and in her speech, she talked about how love can transform even the hardest hearts when you allow it in. Elena met Michael, a volunteer doctor who came once a week to help at the clinic, and their friendship blossomed into a beautiful romance based on shared values and a common passion for serving others. The Miller siblings had found not only each other, but also their true identities, their authentic purposes, and the kind of happiness that doesn't depend on external circumstances, but on the inner peace that comes from living in accordance with the deepest values of the human heart. And on a quiet night, as John gazed at the stars from the balcony of his modest new home near the clinic, he could have sworn he felt Amelia's loving presence, finally at peace, knowing that her children had not only found each other, but had found the path to the kind of life she had always dreamed for them, a life rich in love, purpose, and selfless service to humanity. If you enjoyed this story, be sure to subscribe to Crossroads of Fate and hit that notification bell so you don't miss any more tales that touch the soul. What did you think of John and Elena's journey? Let us know in the comments below.